Yes, I did. Yay! I'm very, very.
So awesome. Okay. So I have just a little less than a minute, and it's 1 o'clock here in airtime. So welcome everyone. We have started the recording, so just keep that in mind. Thank you for choosing this session at Buncombe County STEAM 2023 conference. We're going to solve problems that matter using design thinking. And as we get ready to get started, what I'd like for you guys to do is to go to the link and just let me know how you're feeling today. And you can scan the QR code if you have a camera with you. You can also click on the link I've put in the chat, but go ahead and let me know how you're feeling today. We'll take you to our Mentimeter, and I'll give you just a few minutes to get over there, and we'll look at some of the results here. And if you're not real familiar, you can take the dot and just move it on which of the images best describes how you're feeling right now. Okay, and then if you'll just do a quick little read-in on how you feel about the following vacations, that should be your last question. And you can move accordingly based on a scale of 1 to 5. And if you're just joining us, we're doing our Mentimeter, and I'll go ahead and put that link there. If you'll click on the link. I'm going to resize my screen. Okay. I'll give you just a few more moments to finish up with the Mentimeter. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, so it can be shared with others who maybe were unable to be with us today. And we will go ahead and pull open the Mentimeter. So let me just go ahead and get logged in here. You haven't seen Mentimeter. It is a freemium tool, so it has some free functionality. And when you look at it, you can get a data from it. So as you are thinking about that, just keep that in mind. And We're going to go back to the Mentimeter in just a little bit, but I'm going to skip back into the slideshow, and we'll come back to the Mentimeter in just later on in today's presentation, because I actually have a reason for doing that. All right, let me get back to sharing the screen. Always the fun. All right. So in the chat, I'm going to ask you, if you haven't already, to go ahead and share your name and what you teach or where you work and where you're joining us from. And so if you'll go ahead, if you haven't already done that, if you'll put that in the chat. While you're doing that, just to remind you that if you are in Buncombe County, this is the amount of credit that you will be receiving for a half day. They'll give you 0.3 hours or 0.4 CEUs. If you do a full day, anywhere from 0.6 to 0.8. If you're outside of Buncombe, you will receive an email at the end of the day to issue a certificate that you will then present to your school or LEA, depending on where you are, and you do need to follow their credit. If you're outside of Buncombe, they are recommending that system, if you're in North Carolina, awards digital learning competency credit. And if you are in Buncombe, everything will be handled essentially through Frontline. So remember, you make sure to look for that email link to complete any attendance and feedback. And also there'll be some opportunity to win some really cool door prizes. So fill out that form today. It's only going to be open for about 24 hours. So I recommend you do it as soon as you receive it. As a reminder, as much as I would love to give each of you your own certificate, that is not our process or procedure here. So with that said, let's tell you just a little bit about me, and then we'll jump into the presentation. I am a digital teaching and learning consultant with the Department of Public Instruction. I've been there for about 2 years, but prior to that, I was a high school science STEM teacher for 15. And then I was an ed tech coach and a high school instructional coach for 5 years, actually. But my best teaching assignment was I taught design thinking for an entire year to 10th graders. And that was a great experience. And I believe what I saw with design thinking, it gives our students, regardless as to where they may be academically or in other areas, the chance to be very successful, to use their own experiences and pull in what they know. And so I totally believe that this approach, when we integrate it in the work we do with our students, can really help to motivate and connect our students. And I'll tell you more about my experience as we go along. And also my claim to fame is I'm originally from the Asheville area, so I was born there, and so I'm happy to be with a lot of our people from Western North Carolina. All right, so with that said, I want you guys to think about what our ISTE standards are. And if you are in North Carolina at one of our public schools, you can access your ISTE membership through NC Ed Cloud. There's a tile when you log in, like you're going to check your attendance or update your grades for ISTE, and you can click on that and activate your membership if you have it. The Department of Public Instruction provides that for you all. So be sure you're taking advantage of that. All right, so the standards we're going to cover here are a lot of them. We have our student standards, which we call our digital learning standards. So we're going to hit innovative design, or design thinking basically radiates this whole standard with innovative designer. We're also going to empower our learners, and we're going to work on our knowledge constructors aspect. For educator standards, or those that are classroom teachers, we're going to hit the standards that involve learner, designer, and facilitator. All right, so in the chat, I'm going to ask this to be as interactive as we can make it virtually. But in the chat, I would like for you, when I say go, wait until I say go, but I'm going to ask you to answer this question. And I'm going to put it in the chat, and then I'll read it to you. but I want you to wait to enter your answer until I'll tell everyone. So we're going to do like a 1, 2, 3, and you'll hit enter. So, what is sustainability? So, take a moment and think about that. Type it in the chat. And in just a moment, I'll tell you to hit enter and we'll look at all our answers. But I want you to go ahead and think about what is sustainability. And I'll give you a moment and you can type that in there. When I say 1, 2, 3, go, hit enter, and we'll see what everyone says. But wait until I give you that cue. Okay. And go ahead and begin to type it in there if you're ready. And in just a moment, I'm going to give you the cue. All right. And 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, I love what we're seeing in the chat. And are you guys beginning to see maybe a common theme or some trends among what people have put in here? And some of us have some slightly different perspectives of sustainability. But when we look at it, what we're looking at is either kind of continuing themes where they are the ability to keep things in kind of a constant state. If some of you are a little more environmental science based, you may have a little more specific thing to look at. So using resources no faster than they can renew them. I love that, Mark, that you put that in there, and doing no harm to the function. So, Mark, I bet you probably are a science teacher, because that sounds like a really great science teacher answer. So I love it. Since this is a STEAM conference, I've changed our presentation to focus on some science connections. And I'm going to begin. And the reason I ask you about what sustainability means is I'm going to focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And those goals, there's 17 of them. Many of them will connect directly with the work that we do with students in our science classes. And whether you're the elementary, middle, or high school level, these are themes that kind of radiate through science education altogether. They also are other goals that will overlap a lot with your social studies standards. So when we think about this, I've just pulled some of the ones that immediately would be covered by the middle and high school science standards. And if they're covered in middle and high school, they're also covered in North Carolina and elementary. But if you take a second and look at them, goal 6, and I've numbered them the way the UN numbers them, deals with clean water and sanitation. We definitely understand that clean water is super important for all people to have access to. I know those of you that live in the Asheville area, I know there's some concern about the quality of the French Broad River and some of the contaminants that may be in it. And so we have to be conscious of that. And today in our design thinking simulation, we're going to actually focus on the clean water and sanitation standard. And to help you get more familiar, if you're not as familiar with these are the 17 sustainable goals. And you, if you like, can learn more about these on the website. I'm going to put it in the chat. But you may see some of these goals pertain more to some of the things that you teach or in the work you do with students. We're going to go ahead and just watch a short video on the sustainability. And as you guys understand, trying to play videos can always be a little problematic, but I'm going to go ahead and try to play it. Let me know in the chat if you can hear it or not, and then we'll try to adjust it if there's an issue. As you watch the video, I want you to think about how some of the goals you see connect with the curriculum or the work that you do with students. So see if you can see if any of these goals have a connection between the work you do or the curriculum that you integrate with your students. So here we go for the video, and let me know if you can hear it.
Did you know that the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a universal call to action that unites 193 countries around the world? If these global goals are fulfilled by 2030, life on Earth will be better for everyone. So, what are these goals? Eliminate poverty in all its forms. No hunger. Everyone should have safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. Everyone has equal access to healthcare, thus ensuring our well-being and a healthy life. Equal access to a quality education. Ensure gender equality where women and girls have the same opportunities as men and boys. By achieving these goals, each member of our society will be equal, safe, and happy. UN global goals also include access to safe drinking water and sanitation, access to clean energy that is safe for people and the environment, sustainable and stable economic growth. Everyone has a decent job, strong infrastructure, and the support of innovations. Lower inequality within and among countries. Cities and settlements be developed without damaging the environment and people. Achieving these goals will result in the well-being of people and our planet. We can further take care of our environment with the following goals: sustainable and safe production and consumption of products. Take urgent measures to reduce climate change and its impact. Ensure the sustainable use and protection of ocean and sea resources. Restore and protect Earth's ecosystems. By achieving these goals, we will form a society where strong institutions ensure peace and justice. It is important for everyone to be involved and to build partnerships for achieving sustainable development goals. You are part of this process. Demand the implementation of these goals. Take the lead and share information with your friends.
So that was just a short video, and there's a link to it in the slide deck. But if you guys will go ahead and take a moment and think about how did you or how could you connect some of these goals, and maybe which goals, how can you connect them with the students that you teach or the way that you work with students? So go ahead and take just a few moments and throw that up into chat, and we'll review some of those answers. Hey, that broke up. If you had a question, can you go ahead and ask it again? My computer was breaking up. I can tell you guys are thinking. So I've put up a picture of those goals, but think about how the work that you do with students, can it connect with one of these goals? And if you could just share that in the chat, and I'll give you a few more minutes to think about that.
It's showing that the draft continues to accumulate and
Okay. I love what I'm seeing here in the chat. It's awesome. And if you're kind of stuck for a little bit, just review what some of the other attendees are sharing. And if I mispronounce your name, I will apologize. Feel free to correct me. Daisha said that the goals fit into the current environmental earth standards directly. The next and harder point is how to make them relevant to our students. And I love that. Daisha, you'd send that to me as a direct message. I don't think other people are seeing it. But this was the whole premise of this topic presentation, is how can we make them relevant to our students? And I'm hoping with their design thinking framework can make it relevant to them. Abigail, you shared helping students develop strategies to cope with the issues they're going to face at home and at school. And I would also add, if you're okay with me adding, during the course of their lifetime, because they're going to see some of these issues become much more prominent than even now for us. One of our people who I think is using their iPhone or cell phone via research into connecting local community examples to these goals. And I think that's really insightful, because when we can connect these goals to what's going on in our own backyard, all of a sudden people, like as meeting our students, essentially see why what they're learning matters. And lots of times our students can come up with amazing solutions for some of those problems that we are working with or we're faced with in our community. So I love that. Mark said you work with most of these goals in your classes, which I love. Science education really does cover a lot of these. And even though I'm a chemistry, physical science teacher, mainly by training and experience, you know, there's times that when I can make those curriculums most relevant is by using these goals or connecting to them in various ways. Daisha shared we do a project drawdown to focus on women's rights and access to medicine, education, and food. So very important. Jake has shared that some of this is more driven by either the county office or DPI when you look at goals maybe 2, 3, and 10. Some of it can be dealt with in the classroom in terms of making sure every student is given an opportunity to succeed. And I love that. And so when we look at this, at this point, if you've not done a lot with design thinking, a lot of it is very going to overlap a lot with PBLs, if you're familiar with PBLs and more authentic assessment types of learning. And so with that said, let's go ahead and let's develop a common definition for design thinking. So in design thinking, the way I equate it and the way I first explained it when I started teaching is it's like the scientific method. It's similar in that you're trying to solve a problem. And we see that very important in the work that our students will be doing, especially for those of us who work more in STEM. But we don't just have to be in a STEM area for our students to be good problem solvers. In fact, we want our students to be problem solvers. And I love this definition that David Lee inspired for design thinking. So it's a process to solve problems that impact humans. Sometimes if we're using just the scientific method, sometimes we don't always consider is how that problem could impact humans. But in design thinking, instead of beginning with the problem first, like in scientific method, if you will, we actually begin in looking at the way that something or humans could be impacted by something. So we began with what we're going to call the empathy stage. And when we think about empathy, our empathy is when we first begin to really understand or get a feel for what it's like to be a person outside of ourselves. David Lee really was instrumental in helping me think about that our students actually now are going to become designers and agents of change. And if you think about that, if someone's solving a problem that's impacting me, I definitely want them to be that agent of change. So they're going to work on solving that problem. So if someone asks you what design thinking is, it's a process to solve problems that directly impacts humans or others. And what I love about design thinking is there's an equity piece here that students, regardless of their age, whether they're kindergartners, fifth graders, eighth graders, 10th graders, they can all enter the design thinking process and do it successfully. And that's what we're going to focus on. Now, if you look up the design thinking steps, unlike maybe like if when I was back in the day, I had to do this board and start off with my problem, my hypothesis, my test, conclusion, and kind of that kind of process. Design thinking is a very non-linear process for solving problems. And oftentimes you may go into one step and have to go back to the original step. It's a lot of, to me, a lot of what the work that scientists do. Because sometimes you get so far in trying to find something, and you realize you made a mistake or overlooked something. You have to go back earlier in the process, or maybe to square one to begin. And so we're going to watch a short video on design thinking. As you watch the video on design thinking, what I want you to do is to think about in that video, choose one or two points that really stood out to you. So it's just a short video, and it's going to go through what's considered the 5 common steps of design thinking. But I said there's no one way, but this is usually the intro to design thinking steps to go through, and it's the process we're going to use today. And I'll talk more about why there's some variations in just a moment. So just like before, we're going to play the video and hope it does well. So here we go.
Hi there. Have you noticed that the world is full of problems? There are big, hairy problems like poverty and disease, and small annoyances like misplacing your keys. However, the geniuses at Stanford have come up with a process that will broaden your perspective and help you create better solutions, no matter the type of problem. This process is called design thinking, and it's here to change the way you tackle problems. Design thinking encourages people to explore new alternatives, creating options that had not existed before. Design thinking is successful because it focuses on the needs of the user. It's more than just good ergonomics. It's about understanding the context and culture of the stakeholders involved. This understanding is found using direct observation and qualitative data, which produces stories that people can really empathize with. Once the research is conducted, the problem solver is more apt to define what the real problem is. After diagnosing the true problem, it's time to ideate or brainstorm new ideas without the constraints of existing solutions. Because design thinkers learn by doing, these radical ideas are then made into simple prototypes that test possible outcomes. Rapid prototyping speeds up the innovation process because we only learn about the quality of our ideas when we test them in the real world. The process of ideating, prototyping, and testing is repeated early on so that mistakes are quick, cheap, and ultimately lead to success. So, why design thinking? The process provides a method and a unifying language for multidisciplinary collaboration, leading to greater creativity and better solutions faster. Suddenly, the world's problems are simple and manageable with design thinking.
Okay, so if you'll take a few moments and add in the chat 1 or 2 points that stood out to you from the video, or ahas, or maybe it solidified something you already thought. So I'll give you a few moments to do that, and then we'll review your answers and then move into our simulation. And feel free, short phrases are fine if you like. Just 1 or 2 points that stood out to you from the video. Thank you, Mark. I love that it is multidisciplinary thinking and collaboration. It's no longer that single discipline or siloed. And when we think about what scientists do, and I make an assumption that we all have an interest in science learning, um, we want our students to be well versed in a variety of things. And while it's good to be strong in a particular area, we definitely want our students in the world they're going to live in to have strengths in many areas. So I love it. Daisha, the focus, including the big points, big difficulty with what they're facing. And, our students are going to see that. They're going to see these issues in ways that probably you and I don't see them in, and definitely ways in which other generations will view very differently. But we definitely want to incorporate their perspectives because that's empowering to them. So the empathizing is crucial early on. Yes. And empathy is used throughout the entire design thinking process. And I love that you connected with that student interest and motivation. Abigail, that intentional effort for being inclusive and positive student collaboration and engagement. And when students are fully vested in this process, they are in it to win it, so to say, and your role is truly as a facilitator. I taught design thinking after about 18 years of being in education. I said 15 of those were mainly chemistry and science, but I was having to teach lots of disciplines outside of those. I was having to go back and teach law and civics. I was having to teach writing and storytelling and a variety of different things and a lot of topics in doing design thinking over the course of that year with these students. And so I love that you're beginning to see it. Now, I do want to take a point to stress, and I think this is so important, and you're welcome to push back and disagree with me. But I think so often in my experience with scientists and related careers that sometimes we become so pointed in the work we're doing that we forget that oftentimes the reason that that work is important is because it impacts others, whether that's us as humans or maybe animals and plants and other living organisms throughout the world. And so I think with this empathy piece reminds us of why the work that we do as scientists and science teachers is really important. And I always give the example, if I was someone who came up with a drug that could cure cancer, but I didn't share that with anyone, that's not very useful, right? I'm not really solving that problem. And I think one of the best things we can do is equip our students with a mindset, experience, and dispositions that when they go into life, that they have practiced and improved upon the importance of empathy. And so empathy matters. And I think we can agree, based in the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen whether it was with the disruptions caused by COVID, some of the political interactions and discourses and disruptions, we've had those over the past few years. If there's ever a time when we need our students to be able to exhibit and practice and improve on their empathy, it is definitely now. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to switch focus, and I'm going to ask you to go to our Jamboard, and we'll be using the Jamboard most of the rest of today for you guys to respond to, because it will just facilitate that much better. So if you like, you can either scan the QR code or just click on the link I've put in the chat. And we're going to go to our Jamboard, and I'll go over Jamboard real quickly. When you get to Jamboard, if you've never used Jamboard before, it's an interactive whiteboard of sorts, and you can write on it. And over here off to the side, you're going to see some tools. So I'd like for you to go ahead and click on the tool that looks like a Post-it note. And click on that. You can change the color if you like. And we'll be mainly using Post-it notes through today. And just real quick, just type in there your name and where you are joining us from, just as a practice. And then, yep. And if for some reason it covers up someone, you can just click and move it. You can rotate it, but go ahead and just put in there your name and where you're joining us from. You can also click other things. You can do a text box. I tend to like Post-it notes for here. And if you haven't used Jamboard before, it is part of the Google Suite that you guys probably have access to with Google Docs and Google Slides. So, if you're good, just kind of play around with it for a second. Make sure you're comfortable with it. And then we're going to go over to slide 2. If you're ready, you can go up here and just click over and go to slide 2. And I'll give you that direction in just a moment. I want to make sure everyone gets over there. If you're having trouble, just let me know in the slide. Jake, thank you for turning yours upside down. I love it. Way to stand out. You can also do the drawing function that we'll see, and students will do everything. I did have to give edit access. So if you're using this with students, as you probably know, you may want to be mindful of some of the shenanigans that they may play. All right, it looks like we're in decent shape. So we're going to go over to slide 2. And in slide 2, I have put in here in the center a graphic that has empathy. And I'd like for you to use the Post-it notes and tell us why empathy matters. So click on a Post-it note and post anywhere on here why empathy matters. And I'll give you just a few moments to think about and react to that, and then we'll continue on. And if you're kind of stuck, because I realize it's in the afternoon after lunch, feel free to kind of see what someone has put, and that may help give you some inspiration. And I'm going to start off with this one up here, the yellow one up in the upper corner. If one does not feel, one can't care. And I think that is so important because that is a characteristic that I think we would want all humans to have. I think realistically, we realize there's big variations of that. But most people are going to fall in that if they, feel, then they have the ability to care and connect with others. And this is so important. And I love that perspective of empathy. I don't oftentimes see that, but I think that's so important. When we look at some of the other responses, student interest, motivation, and purpose for their work and effort, empathy is a huge motivator for that. And I love that with empathy, we see kids do things that oftentimes they may not do otherwise, maybe because they're anxious or they're reluctant or for whatever reason. So I love that perspective as well. If you can't relate to how your students are feeling, how can you hope to get them to care about your content? And we've often heard that, that our students have to know we care about them and that we want them to be successful as people before we can get them into content. And so we see that relationship piece reflected there, which I'm loving that as well. It's difficult to understand the need for change if you cannot put yourself, whether mentally or physically, into someone else's perspective or position. So important. I love it. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys just to stay here on the Jamboard, but I'm going to jump back over to the presentation just for a second, but leave your computers on the Jamboard. We talked about with design thinking, we want our students to become agents of change and problem solvers. And so what we're going to do is go into our simulation using design thinking. And if you look on the Zoom screen, this is the design thinking process you saw in the video that has been developed by the design school out of Stanford. And its steps are empathy, identify or define the problem, ideate, prototype, and test. Ideate sometimes is a new term for many people, especially students. And we'll talk about that when we get there. This graphic in yellow, when I looked at what the design school in Stanford did, their process is solid and good. But one thing in my experience that I felt we were missing is we're not bringing in what our students have observed in their past experiences. And so I designed this graphic for us to think about, like, our students don't come to us just empty, regardless of their age. Lydia, your students do not come to you without having some real world experience. And so when we can connect those real world experiences with school, we turn our kids back on to seeing school as a place where they can be successful. The students where I taught design thinking was a restart school. So it's a school that historically had not been meeting their test score for a period of time. And they were allowed to restart and have some flexibility. But these were kids that were in the same elementary, middle, and high for such a long time. And the system had failed them. And a lot of them were just waiting to drop out of school. And many of the kids, when I had them in their 10th grade year, it was their last and best chance to remain in school and get a high school diploma. And with design thinking, we were able to take the world that they live in and they come from and connect it with school, which was a place that was not connecting with the world where they lived, the world they came from. And so we were able to bridge that gap, blend them together. And I'm really excited that all but 5 of those students ended up graduating on time out of about 150. And about 10 to 15 of them graduated early because they saw the value in this and they saw how school connected and it supported them. And so this has the power to transform the learning, the perspective, and the attitude our students have while they're in school. And it works very well with students at all levels, but it was particularly successful with some of the kids who had been historically underachieving, maybe if they were special education or identified as that, if they were students whose primary language was not English. And the average students who were in grade level found it a really good way to connect. So it helped students at all levels. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull this in, and I talked about earlier that we're going to connect this with some of our earth environmental standards we have here in North Carolina, particularly with that UN sustainability goal of clean water. And I think we all can agree that if your water is not clean, then it's going to be difficult for you to have a quality of life that is good. And we know that sometimes we're very fortunate that we have access to readily clean water where we live, but that is not the case for many people around the world. And so one of the tools that I use to help our students is an empathy map. And empathy maps are a way for our students to practice and exercise and grow stronger with empathy. And from this point on, you guys are going to get the ability to transition into being kind of in a student role. And we're going to work some on developing empathy through empathy maps. Now, one of the best ways to develop empathy is through talking to others. But if I needed to talk to someone who lived in sub-Saharan Africa, I probably wouldn't have readily accessible abilities to talk to that person in many cases. And so one of the ways that we can help our students with empathy with groups that we may not have direct access to is through resources such as read-ins, media, and I've constructed a playlist. Now, some of you, the problem we're going to focus on is one that occurred in Jackson, Mississippi. And for example, when you design your design thinking challenges, obviously begin with a curriculum standard. And so I've pulled our 9th Earth Environmental Standards is how humans use water. We're going to evaluate it. So this would be our current science standards in North Carolina that will be changing in the next year, but I don't think this one's going to go away. But what we're going to do is focus on whatever that curriculum standard is with any design thinking activity. And then we are going to go through and focus on an issue. And I chose the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. And with that crisis, if you're not familiar with it, then we're going to help you get familiar with it, because with design thinking, we have to make sure everyone has access to the same information. Some of you may be more familiar with the water crisis that occurred in Jackson, Mississippi. Some of us may not be as familiar. And so what I've put in the chat is a playlist of resources. And if you click on that, what you can see is I have a couple of resources that you guys get to choose here. And so if you'll go to this link that I just put there, I'm going to ask you to choose 1 to 2 of these resources. And as you are working on those resources, I'm going to give you some time, because this is going to be just like I would do with my students. They're going to choose 1 or 2 of these resources, and they're going to go through and begin to look at and read. Now, obviously, because of simulation, I don't have time to really kind of preview and pump the students up. But if you'll notice, many of the articles or resources I've pulled, I've specified if it's something to read, if it's something to watch or listen to. And so the students get some choice in what they want to do. And then after they've looked at one of the resources, I am then going to ask them to come down here and work on an empathy map. On the empathy map, and I'm going to go ahead and preview this for you because you're going to do all this together, is you will choose, and I said 2 items, but let's just do 1 item. And then you'll click to the next slide. So you can see I have several of the same slide, but this is an empathy map. And I designed this to kind of meet the needs we wanted here. But what you'll do is click in the middle and put your name. So I've left you a few that other teachers have done to help you. But you're going to answer these questions going around that are in color. So you'll start with a red question. List some evidences from your playlist about what you learned about the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. What challenges did the people experience? Describe the impact that the people experience based on the resource you chose. And how would you feel if you experienced this problem? And so this empathy map is designed to get them thinking about what would they do if they lived in Jackson, Mississippi and had this water crisis. Before I give you about 8 to 10 minutes to work on that, does anybody have any questions about what I've asked you to do? Let's see, I'm not sure if I understood you. It broke up, but I've put the questions here on the slide 1. And so feel free to choose a resource. If you're doing the slides on the empathy maps, start on about slide 11, because that's where the new ones start. And you would just click your name. You can choose anything from slide 11 or on. I'll be here, but I'm going to give you about 8 minutes to begin work on that. If you have questions, feel free to type in the chat or ask on the microphone, okay? All right, so take about 8 minutes and work on just skimming some of those resources and completing the empathy map. Okay, and if you haven't, feel free to jump over to the empathy map and begin trying to do one or two of the questions. I know the time here is always a factor, but jump over there and try to complete one or two of the questions as best you can, just so you have at least that portion of the experience of that empathy map. Um, obviously with your students, you may allot more time or assign this in just a different way, but feel free to jump over there and we'll look at what some of you are doing. So I'm living what I'm seeing. And if you're still a little stuck, feel free just to kind of look out and see what some of our fellow participants are put in. I love to see what you guys are doing. Okay, so I'm going to stop you there just for a second. If you're not done with the empathy map, that's okay. But do you guys at least begin to see the value of how we took a resource and I pulled just articles or news clips that could easily be found? Most of them are either NPR or television stations that would be readily accessible. Some of them may be newspaper articles. So, kind of those current event type things is what I pulled in here. And I just formulated some questions that would help our students begin to think about why clean water is important. And hopefully, that as you guys are looking at these questions and answering them, you're beginning to see some trends in what you teach, a connection between some of the curriculum, but also with that empathy piece and how that merges those together super well. Chris, you indicated that if you had experienced this problem, you would feel neglected and underrepresented. And I think that's so important because when we look at Jackson, Mississippi, it is the capital of Mississippi. It's one of our 50 capitals. Yet the residents in parts of Jackson, Mississippi do not have access to clean drinking water. If you had ever told me we would have had that for one of our capital cities, I would have told you there's not a chance. I would have told you you're probably crazy but yet we're seeing that here reflected in these resources that were provided in the playlist. Sarah indicated the impacts can lead to unhealthy conditions and sickness. And we could maybe go back and ask what some of those might be, especially if you're teaching maybe a higher level like AP Environmental. But we know that when people don't have access to clean water, then they are living in unhealthy conditions. They don't have clean water to drink. They don't have clean water for toilet use and for bathing. And that creates a problem, right? And so we need to make sure that when we think about these problems, that we're beginning to identify the way that they impact humans, because that's how design thinking works. When we think about how something is impacting humans and we come up with a problem we're going to solve, we have to look at that impact. Daisha, you said it means the city cannot produce, you quoted, which I love here. It means the city cannot produce water to fight fires, reliably flush toilets, and meet other needs. Like, wow, if someone's house caught on fire, the city would not be able potentially to have fire trucks that could put it out. And I think your reaction with the what? Yeah. I mean, that's a real call to action, especially for kids who are real conscious of that. And we think about how that may have that impact on students. And we have got to begin to connect with that. And what I'm hoping you're seeing is through this empathy map, which is just very quickly designed by me, you're beginning to see how this is helping our students take information that they have gathered, in this case, in a playlist, because we couldn't necessarily go and interview residents of Jackson, Mississippi. Some of you are creative enough, you might find out a way to use FaceTime or other virtual meeting option, but we're able to learn empathy through other things. And the way that we're experiences, we're reading about one group of people's experiences and thinking about how their experiences may impact me if I were in their shoes. So that's super powerful. So I love it. And you have other examples when I've done this before to kind of look at, but feel free if you need to pull and use this. It's a simple Google map, and I just put the questions in here as a background image, and then I just put text boxes so they could type in them. You can also print it out. So with that said, we're going to now go back to our Jamboard, and we're going to move on from empathy just because of time's sake. We're going to move on from empathy over to part 2. And in part 2, and some of you guys have already done it, I love it. On slide 3, if you wanted to put an image of your empathy map there, you can, and some of you guys have done it. Awesome, I love it. And that empathy map is what I have my students use, because it's like they've collected all their data now with the empathy and with the empathy map. And now we're going to move on to part 2, which is the identifier define. And here's my pro tip for you. Identifying or defining the problem is what drives the rest of the process. The empathy is a very open-ended aspect, but then we're going to take what we've learned here in empathy, and I will call it data since most of us are science-oriented. We're going to take all that data with empathy that we learned, and now we're going to begin to think about it and see if what we saw, we can identify or define a problem. And what I found, this comes from the design school, is having students, even if they're in the AP level, the high school level, or any other, write this simple statement. And so in this case, we have to think about who are the people that we're focusing on. This can be an individual or group of people. In this case, it would be the residents of Jackson, Mississippi. So the residents of Jackson, Mississippi. And we're going to complete the rest of this. So the first blank is the person we're solving the problem for, in this case, the residents of Jackson, Mississippi. We're going to choose to use the word needs or wants. So they need or they want what Because of what? So I'd like for you to write this statement in a post-it note and then just post it like I did. And I didn't finish mine because I won't give it away, but I want you to take the next 2 minutes and think about a problem statement that you're going to write, because this is what's going to drive what we do the rest of the time. And as a facilitator of this, you need this done because you may have 25 to 30 different students trying to solve different problems. And if you're like me, I can't keep up with all that. So what I do is I always have the students tell me their identifier defined statements. So take a few minutes and write that, and we'll review those. And the better the identify defined statement you write, the better the solution will be for the problem. So, and if you want to look at some of the statements we have up there, feel free. I will also say here, I think the more simple the statement is, sometimes the easier it might be for students to work on solving that problem, especially if I'm working with like middle school students or elementary. The more simple you can keep the statement, the easier it may for them to focus on that. If I'm working with students at a higher academic level, say like in an AP environmental, then I may, push them to have a little more of a complex statement, if that makes sense. And your students best, not the people in Raleigh, that would be like me now that I'm DPI, or even the people over there at your office on Bingham Road. Your students best, or how to push them and get what you need to get out of them. So I usually, if I'm doing this with students, would break and pull their needs and identify together and go through and give them some feedback, and then pick up maybe the next day with the rest of this. I've kind of taken a little more time making sure you understood the purpose and some connections here. But in terms of this, if I'm doing this whole design cycle with my students, you're probably looking at anywhere from a portion of 3 to 5 class periods. You don't have to do it that whole time if you're on the 90-minute blocks, but you are probably looking at 3 to 5 class periods to do some portion of this. And so this is one of the natural breaks. So when I look here at some of what our people have put, the residents of Jackson need clean water because it's essential to life. So again, I'm showing some scientific literacy there because I realize for life, you have to have water. And for a lot of our students, that's important. that they have made that connection. I know it's simple probably for a lot of us, but for a lot of our students to make that connection, for maybe your average ninth grader sometimes to make that connection is really awesome. The residents of Jackson need access to clean water because all species deserve clean water, which is essential for a good life. Again, that connection to water quality and quality of the life we have, they go hand in hand. Water is a basic need required to survive. Again, we're connecting some of that biology information we learned. We have to have water. We need access to clean, potable water because water is a basic human right. And again, we're beginning to see all that kind of manifest there. And the great thing is here, students write their own statements, and there's no right or wrong answer, as long as it's kind of backed up by what we need them to use in terms of the scientific accuracy or the literacy of the science that they've learned. So what we then do is take this and we go over to ideate. Ideate is kind of a fun word, but we see the word ideal in it. And this is forming a solution to the problem. And here, I don't let my students kind of get hung up by barriers to ideation. Like, I couldn't do that because I don't have access to this. Ideation, I always like to kind of phrase it as a wild brainstorming of solutions. So thinking about the problem statement that you just wrote, and you're going to refer back to your problem statement that you just wrote. And if you weren't able to get one written, pull someone else's. I want you to begin to generate some solutions, and don't let barriers keep you from doing it. I can't do this because ideation is not where we stop and let those things keep us from doing it. Ideation is like, if I could do anything, the sky was the limit, money was no object, you would just put it all out there. So go ahead and see if you can ideate one or two solutions for the problem you referenced. And then we'll talk about how we kind of pull this together and what we would do next, since we're running a little short on time. Now, I love what we're doing because we do this kind of automatically, and we skip into some of what we know is going to work. But I want you to think about your students. And if you see what I've put up top in the green and the pink, I focused on them not having access to put out fires. And I put two solutions up there. One is to post fire extinguishers on every light pole in the city. I misspelled city, so excuse that. But that may come across to you as very impractical. It comes across to me as very impractical. And now my next one is probably even more impractical: to train elephants to carry water throughout the city to put out fires. It would be possible, but it's probably not going to make a lot of sense from a training and capacity standpoint. But what I want you to do is not let these things kind of get in the way, because this is where our kids can be super creative And lots of times what I do is I have them talk with their peers about their ideation, and then I have them kind of pull it back. And if I'm facilitating this and I go up to a student and I said, oh, you want to train elephants to carry water, remind me what problem you're solving. And if the problem they're trying to solve is having water to put out fires, then it definitely addresses that problem. But if I go over here to this far blue one in the corner and my problem is to put out fires, and this solution is to tax the wealthy, that solution doesn't really address the problem I identified. Do you guys see that? So I always refer them back to what problem were you trying to solve, and does this solution address it? And so the tax the wealthy probably is not clearly going to show how that solves the issue with having water to put out fires. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of following up and helping students realize that. So, but for the sake of time, you guys are kind of getting the idea of how we come up with different ideals. I have my kids collaborate, and then we're going to pull it down to the real world when we get to that next slide, which is prototype. And this is where we're going to physically create that. And I love to have my kids build if I have the materials that we need. And I often use just what I call the Dollar Tree materials that you might have. If you have Amazon boxes, cardboard boxes, duct tape, you can never have enough duct tape. You may have other materials. I've gotten fabric from faculty members that do lots of crafts and sew, and I've got yarn. And so I just get lots of different things, glue sticks. If your school has a makerspace, usually that's hosted by your media coordinator or school librarian, you can pull all that in and pull in those resources so kids can begin to build their prototype. And I want to kind of show you, if we go back here to the example of this individual who talked about retrofitting the present drinking water facilities. This might be a really good one that would make it through to the prototype phase. And you could have kids actually design that, and they might could get Legos, use some straws. They'd probably have to do a little research on thinking about what retrofitting is and what qualities that would need. But then the kids could actually design that prototype. And in some cases, they could actually see if it worked like it was supposed to. So hopefully you guys, I love to fill the tanker trucks from the river and drive very fast to any fires. I love that. Thank you. I love the humor. But hopefully you're beginning to see how we can take these ideals and then move into that prototype where they can physically build it. And depending on your situation and what you have available, you can use simple materials. If your school is fortunate to have more complex materials, you might can talk to some of the CTE teachers if you're at the high school level and maybe get even blocks left over from maybe the carpentry class, or if you have a metals class. I think one or two of you may have been at Nesbitt, and so you might have access to some of the more advanced CTE courses there. Some of the little pieces of things that could be used that probably would have been discarded anyway. And so as we begin to think about this, hopefully you're beginning to see how this design thinking process can be used to help connect your students with your content and solving a real world problem. Because of time, I'm going to kind of skip over and share with you some resources that we have. If you want to start with something simple that maybe isn't as science related, these are some I've done with middle schoolers, create a screensaver or a background for their laptop. I did that with sixth graders. It was very effective for getting them into the design thinking process. So you can apply design thinking in many different ways. Because this was a STEM conference, I did want to gear it towards some of the science needs so you guys could see that. I have resources in the slide deck that you are welcome to look at. Some of them are books, some of them, like the Wakelet resources, as I find things, I add it there and you guys can see that. So as you're kind of going through, check that out. One thing I will encourage you that's probably really good is the Design Thinking Google site my colleague Lauren Boucher and I created. We have some simple things you guys can pull from there and do what I call design sprints, which aren't a full design thinking cycle, but just a sprint that you can do maybe as a warm up in probably 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes. You have some activities in there you can pull and use with your students as well. So with that said, you're welcome to share any of this presentation and adapt it. With design thinking, you saw kind of how the full cycle would go. After prototype, we would test it and then maybe revise it or reinvent it. And it does have some overlay with the engineering design process as well. The main difference is there is a piece that focuses on empathy and design thinking that sometimes is not focused on in engineering design or in other design problem solving processes. So with that said, if you guys have any questions or thoughts, feel free to take the mic or share in chat. Otherwise, thank you guys for attending. If I can help you, I would love to come out and be a thought partner with you or show up if you're doing some stuff and co-teach in your classroom. All you have to do is ask me to come if you're in North Carolina. Lydia, I can't come to Croatia. I'd love to, but if you're in North Carolina, since I work with DPI, I do have the flexibility to come out and maybe team teach with you or at least be a thought partner to help you walk through some of this if you need that as well. So thank you guys so much. Feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat. Otherwise, have a great day, and I appreciate you guys spending your time with me. All right, and if you need anything, I'll stay behind for just a few minutes. Otherwise, feel free to get up and take a break. I'm sorry I kept you working the whole time. I should not have done that. So I'm going to stop the recording and have a great upcoming school year.